Good evening to everyone here, our audience at the Iowa City Public Library, and good evening to our audience who are watching this lecture live streamed on the library's YouTube channel. I'm Kathleen Kamrick. I'm with the League of Women Voters of Johnson County, and our talk tonight, Libraries as Democracy Builders, is the first lecture in the League of Women Voters 2025-2026 season. Our speaker tonight, Sam Helmick, will deliver their talk via Zoom. Sam had to be in Washington, D.C. at the Library of Congress this week, so is unable to be here in person. But since Sam is Zooming in, the presentation will be live, and then we'll do a regular question and answer after the presentation. I want to extend special appreciation to our co-sponsors tonight. That is the Iowa City Public Library, the Coralville Public Library, the North Liberty Public Library, the Solon Public Library, the Antelope Lending Library, and the University of Iowa School of Library and Information Science. The Antelope Lending Library and the Johnson County Libraries have information set up on tables in the back of the room that you can pick up after the presentation. The League of Women Voters of Johnson County is delighted to sponsor this program on libraries. One of the League's priorities is transparency and citizenship, including encouraging direct citizen participation in government. Libraries are crucial partners in this work. As the National League of Women Voters website states, and I'm going to quote from that website, public libraries have a long history of cultivating strong civic communities. There are roughly 9,000 public libraries across this country. These critical institutions offer public spaces for community members to access trusted information and engage in discourse that bridges political divides. Libraries are a powerful resource for promoting knowledge, learning, and community. Libraries and leagues are two of the few lasting, nonpartisan civic entities with the community ties and trust to encourage civic dialogue based on issues their community cares about. They have a long history of working together to inform and empower voters. So with this partnership in mind, I'm now going to go to Sam Helmick. Sam is the 2025-2026 President of the American Library Association, which is the oldest and largest library association in the world. In 2023, the National Book Critics Circle gave the American Library Association the Toni Morrison Achievement Award, which honors, quote, institutions that have made a lasting and meaningful contribution to book culture. The American Library Association was honored for its long-standing commitment to equity, including its 20th century campaigns against library segregation and its perennial stance as a bulwark against those regressive and illiberal supporters of book bans. At a time when our nation's libraries remain under relentless assault, the American Library Association towers over the literary landscape as a beacon for our most vulnerable voices. Sam Helmick earned a degree in Library and Information Science from the University of Illinois. Sam is also a past president of the Iowa Library Association and is the Community and Access Services Coordinator at the Iowa City Public Library. Sam has served on the American Library Association Executive Board, the Freedom to Read Foundation, the Intellectual Freedom Roundtable, and chaired the Iowa Governor's Commission on Libraries, and has served on many other library committees. Please join me in welcoming Sam tonight, virtually. Sam?
Oh, thank you so much, Kathleen, and thank you so much, Iowa City Public Library, for hosting me in a very different capacity than I'm used to as the Community Access Services Coordinator. It is an absolute delight to be with you all in community tonight, and I think that this is a clear demonstration of what community looks like. It's going to your library on a weeknight to learn more about civic engagement. It's pulling over in between the spaces that we're serving and supporting each other and the advocacy work and awareness work that we do. So I appreciate your grace and kindness in allowing me to Zoom in tonight. As I transfer between one commitment to another. Tonight we are going to talk about libraries as democracy builders, and we're going to specifically focus on funding, freedom, and civic engagement. And so, Autumn, I wish to thank you in advance, and I will ask you to go to the next slide. I want to welcome you all to the Iowa City Public Library, but I want to thank our sister libraries in Johnson County, as well as the League of Women Voters of Johnson County, for inviting us into this opportunity to learn and support each other tonight. I like to start with a pathway, and so our evening will be talking about why libraries need sustained local investment. We'll be talking about the fight for intellectual freedom and privacy, and then we'll understand a little bit better by the end of the evening how libraries power democracy through access. Here's a little information about myself and spaces you can find me in an advocacy capacity. That email at the bottom left side of the screen, samhelmick.library@gmail.com, is the fastest way to connect. And I am really, really honored to have served in multiple capacities and be overabundantly blessed with opportunity to learn and grow in opportunities and events like tonight. Autumn, could you go to the next slide, please? I ran on the platform that our stories are worth sharing, and it might not be a surprise to you that libraries dabble quite deeply in stories. In fact, the way that we engage with each other as a species and understand and learn and grow is predominantly through the form of story when you look back at our history and throughout antiquity. So I thought tonight, to get a little bit closer, I would tell you about 3 of my stories. I will try to keep them brief so that we can focus on advocacy, but I feel like they have been the library's story that has made me open and vulnerable and always learning, and brought me to a moment this evening with you all. And I imagine that you have very similar library stories, and I hope that I can at some point get to hear some of them. The first story is about tarantulas, my friends. I grew up in Burlington, Iowa, and when I was in high school, despite the fact that the library was so small and so old and that the floors were literally bowing under the weight of the books, I was not a fan of this petition going around to build a brand new library. You see, when I was a teenager, they didn't have a teen advisory board. They didn't even really have a teen collection. They didn't have teen programming. You were lucky to find some Tiger Beat magazines and maybe some R.L. Stine Fear Streets. And then you'd have these librarians sort of side-eye you if you were a precocious reader like I was and tried to sneak up to the second floor in order to read some of the adult books before what they considered to be your time. And therefore, I grew up into a young and voting adult that didn't think that the library was for me, and I didn't see myself in it, and I didn't support the petition or the ballot that successfully built our library in Burlington, Iowa, in my hometown. And when I was in community college there, having homeschooled for several years before, I probably horrified my English professor by writing a paper on why we didn't need a brand new library. And despite that paper, and at Iowa Wesleyan, there was a beautiful, shiny library with a teen space, a teen advisory board where teens could breathe life and fingerprints into their own programs. There were meeting rooms where senior citizens could order a pizza and play like board games or play card games. There were digital resources that existed in my pocket that I could access anytime, despite when the library was closed. And when I volunteered, there was this beautiful program for all of the readers in the summer. And as Iowans, I imagine that you are familiar with the fact that in rural America, often summer reading programs for rural communities and families are the summer vacation. And that was the case in 2008 when the theme was To Catch a Reading Bug, and the Iowa State Extension Office, before it was defunded, would go around to libraries across the state and they would have an insect petting zoo. And so I can really recall the moment that I fell in love with libraries, and it was more than just a new space with brimming opportunity and new hope and a different chance for teenagers who came behind me. There was actually a tarantula in the petting zoo, and I remember standing in the lobby with a little person of a different age, different race, different gender, different background, and they said, "Sam, if you hold the tarantula, I'll pet him." And there are at least 2 things wrong with this story. The first is that if we're going to classify tarantulas, they technically go under arachnid. So I had that kid on a technicality, but the more important issue is that I do not do spiders. And yet, this was the moment where I realized that hardly anywhere else in American life maybe even in the world, can we come together and neighbors can become thought partners and have these transformative educational experiences together? And I remember trembling and holding this wispy spider, this hairy spider, and a tentative hand gently petting it. And so we had this moment of transformation together, and I fell in love with libraries and haven't really stopped talking about it since. I'm very fun at parties. My second story is about 10 years later when I become the chapter counselor for the state of Iowa for the American Library Association and vote on behalf of our state and our state association on matters of national library policy through the American Library Association. When you hold this position in ILA, you are also by default the chair of the Intellectual Freedom Committee for your state. And I was told at the time that I didn't need to worry because Iowa didn't really have book bans or challenges to any really significant extent. And I can still remember swearing in as a counselor in Denver, Colorado, and hearing a story on Facebook Live of a minister checking out LGBTQIA titles, taking them back to his own hometown, out of Orange City to his hometown, and burning them on Facebook Live. And at that point, I was a library advocate. I understood that there were wonderful things it could do for a community, for an individual. I was telling the good library news, but intellectual freedom was a piece of the puzzle that I hadn't quite encountered yet. And so I wrote a card to the Board of Trustees of Orange City Public Library, and I put a Hy-Vee gift card inside with donuts on the outside of that gift card. And I said, I hope carbs will help. When I get back home, we'll learn how to figure this out together. And that was my deep dive into learning about intellectual freedom, the negotiations and good faith conversations that our library board of trustees have all of the time with the community, with the staff on matters of policy, on matters of intellectual freedom. And the response of the Iowa Library Association to encourage this conversation in good faith, to support the library community and see them through, as well as to bring awareness to the greater community about what was taking shape, actually won the University of Illinois' Robert B. Downs Intellectual Freedom Award. We come to about 6 or 7 years later. I'm really loving talking about intellectual freedom. The state of Iowa is giving me more than enough opportunity to learn about it. And we're noticing a pattern throughout the nation. First, there are bills that no longer trust library communities to steward themselves, to make choices for their own family and their own behalf, and to trust their neighbors to do the same. And so we look at collections, we look at programming, we look at the use of meeting rooms, and we suddenly question the policies, processes, and procedures that have served us for 250 years as we adapt with the rate of the communities that we serve. And then the next legislative cycle seems to come after the funding of libraries, which would beg one to wonder if dismantling publicly funded institutions and privatizing access to information, which is access to opportunity, might be the goal in mind. So the third story that I will briefly share is that Senate File 496 started as a list of books that the legislature decided we no longer wanted to have in school libraries. And with our lobbyists through the Iowa Library Association, we had some really behind the scenes, good faith conversations about whether or not we wished to be a state that would do that when we have historically prided ourselves on education and intellectual freedom. At the 11th hour, this term age inappropriate was thrown in, despite its legal murkiness, into the bill, and it was passed. I learned a lot about schools and school librarianship and how there's 50 years of data through the Association of School Libraries that shows the correlation of a robust and credentialed library staff member or media specialist and the success of a student in that school. And I sat at the feet of some wonderful teacher librarians in the School Library Association of Iowa, and together we wrote with the Iowa Library Association a letter of inquiry to the Department of Ed, asking what are the legal parameters of age inappropriate? Can you explain what we do when a library serves K through 12? There are at least a half a dozen libraries in the state that serve as both the public library, which has a broad responsibility to cover the entertainment, educational, and entrepreneurial development of their community, as well as serving as the school library at the same time, which would have a deeper collection and a different mission to support curriculum. And the Department of Ed never answered our letter, neither did the governor. However, Penguin Random House read it in the Des Moines Register and picked it up, and they and the 4 other largest publishers in the nation sued the governor. And this case is in its second injunction, which means it was kicked up to the Fifth Circuit. It has moved back down into the state for its second injunction, and because books belong on shelves until they've had their day in court. If these books aren't on the shelves of Iowa schools, all we are left to determine is that the chilling effect is alive and well in the state of Iowa, and we are seeing a soft form of censorship. So this is sort of my background, and I really appreciate the opportunity to share my stories because I do believe that with stories comes understanding for each other, and with understanding comes support. Would you please move to the next slide, Autumn? So now we're going to talk about library funding because there's a complexity in the state of Iowa and also in states around the country about how libraries are funded, but we're going to simplify this by thinking about it in pretty much 3 or 3.5 streams. Next slide, Autumn, please. Library funding at the local level would be your municipal, your county, or your contracted entities funding, resourcing specific things like the facilities of a library, the library staff, their digital collections in many cases, and then special services that are meeting the unique needs of the community. So specific programs, outreach to our community partners, our neighborhood centers, our educational institutions, instructional technology like our digital media lab and our infrastructure to teach 21st century digital skills, and then just the overall infrastructure. Our state funding, however, provides the state of Iowa Library its budget, as well as the law library of the Iowa legislature, and then they provide through contracting and services initiatives, the statewide services like open access that permit all of us to circulate between the other 543 public libraries in the state of Iowa, as well as the contracts to provide our interlibrary loan services, which borrow books from each other and then support some of the work to borrow books outside of the Iowa library system, and then some of our digital collections. We were very lucky in Johnson County to have pulled our resources, to have resourced our values, and to have created the Digital Johnson County platform, which makes waiting in line for audiobooks and ebooks significantly smaller because a lot of libraries, in fact, most libraries in the state of Iowa use the state consortium for Libby ebooks and audiobooks. That program is called Bridges. And you can be waiting in line for a very long period of time as you share that wealth. So the state library funds also support the staff of the state librarian and its consultants. So when we are teaching our directors and our staff in the 544 libraries around the state on trauma-informed care, on updates to the First Amendment and policies, best practices in librarianship when smaller communities might need support in developing their strategic plan, onboarding their board of trustees, hiring a new director. These consultants are credentialed and highly skilled staff that then train the trainers in the 544 communities that require these resources and these knowledge and skill sets as well. And then lastly, we have the federal funding. Federal funding is usually matched to state funding through the Museum of Library Services. The Institute for Museum and Library Services. This is a really wonderful way to get your tax dollars to do double and triple the work because through IMLS, the state is required to match the funds and invest in their state library in order to obtain them. At least twice when I sat on the Commission of Libraries, we did have to remind the legislator to match those dollars because we'd been aware enough times that IMLS kind of came knocking on our door and said that we really needed to be reminded to honor the agreement. And it's important that we have these federal matching dollars because they do support the state library, they do support the staff, and they are the means by which institutions like the American Library Association and the Association of Rural and Small Libraries are able to provide impactful grants to Iowans and rural communities and library communities around the nation. Next slide. So it's important to see the larger infrastructure and how libraries are funded, but it's also important to remember that for every dollar that we invest in an American library, we've been able to calculate somewhere between a $5 to $9 return on investment. And that is because we have wonderful things like the Digital Media Lab. We have support with software on our digital, our public computers that support Iowa Works and filing for not only unemployment, but also taxes and job applications. And so the American Library Association has been really trying to tell those stories that happen in libraries, but also build toolkits that support entrepreneurial development and incubators of small businesses in the library space. And we see this around the country. And if you're interested in learning more about libraries as economic equalizers, can I point you to Libraries Build Business through the American Library Association. Additionally, libraries are seen at the United Nations level for also developing and generating local business and local commerce. In fact, the American Library Association helped to write some of the sub-points of the 16 Sustainable Development Goals that are the strategic plan, the 15-year-long strategic plan of the United Nations, because they recognize that libraries are community anchor institutions and wonderful partners, and they help those tax dollars or those development dollars do 4 and 5 times the work. And then lastly, it's important to remind the American public that libraries are open for everybody. Regardless of having a card, you can come in and pursue information on cold storage and breathe life into it. When I was first learning about libraries and falling in love, I had the honor of sitting on the pilot program of the American Library Association's Libraries Transform public awareness campaign. And it had a whole bunch of fun because statements, because we wanted to remind folks that even today, 1 out of every 5 American homes do not have sustainable broadband, and having access to public computers, having access to printers, fax machines, hotspots that may circulate is crucial to our national security, our educational construction, and the comprehensiveness of civic life. But then it's also important to remind folks that, libraries are one of the last few places where you aren't the product. You are not being sold a caramel macchiato in order to sit for 5 minutes and enjoy the space and be in public or hop onto Wi-Fi. So it's really important to recognize that libraries are a really good investment in our economic infrastructure, our educational infrastructure, but then also in our general quality of life. Autumn, can I have the next slide, please? Which brings us back to the legislative landscape and why it's sort of not jiving. That over 70% of Americans through third-party studies have said that they do not support censorship or diminishing libraries in any way or shape or form, which is pretty incredible because I'm not sure 70% of us would admit that water is wet and agree on it all at the same time. And so when you look at the legislative landscape in the state of Iowa, despite the fact that we have a wonderful foundation in library history, it's kind of bleak, friends. It's been going on for multiple years. We've been seeing initiatives to remove the meaningful, inclusive initiatives that libraries sort of operate upon and being removed through House files. We've also seen the requirements for credentials and the training for teacher librarians being stripped, in part because it's difficult to hire that position in the state of Iowa when teacher librarians are asked to cover multiple institutions with very little compensation. And so instead of investing in that 50 years of data and recognizing and investing in a school library and multiple media specialists was actually going to directly correlate with student success in the information age, we've decided to take a step back and actually remove any sort of credentialism that would support critical thinking skills and assessment of information in the information age. We briefly touched on Senate File 496, and it's important to recognize that age appropriate being a legally murky term is dangerous for library workers in the state of Iowa because they could actually have personal and professional punitive responses if they do not understand the law and they cannot administer it in the way that it has been spirited. And then we had House File 718, which was not directly meant to influence libraries, but libraries were not supported in the petitioned levies in 97 of our communities where Iowans locally decided to invest in their values and add extra dollars to support library initiatives were stripped. And so we're seeing that unfold. We're seeing communities in 97 Iowa towns and 15% of our public libraries scramble to figure out how we're going to make those ends meet. And we understand that the potential that has been lost is a 5 to 9 return on investment for every dollar that was going in through those special levies. So if your community petitioned to successfully get a library levy on a ballot and then that ballot successfully passed, there was a process by which you could remove that if it no longer fit the initiatives or the values of your community. However, House File 718 stripped our right to have them, to rescind them, to revote them in again, or to maintain the 97 that had been supporting our values in libraries. And then quite scarily last two legislative cycles ago, Senate Study Bill 3161 and its House companion tried to strip library boards, which are knowledgeable, dedicated members of the community who bring the community voice into the library space and are usually voted or appointed in public libraries across the country to understand the policies, the facilities, the procedures, and the implications of what a First Amendment public institution needs to accomplish. They were going to strip the powers of those trustees and give them back to cities, but cities didn't ask for them. Cities weren't going to be resourced with additional training, and cities do not provide that representative element that a board of trustees would have. It additionally tried to remove the codified funding requirement of all public libraries, which would have meant that the 544 libraries across the state may not have been funded anymore, with the change of literally an actual word. And it's important to just to understand that with the legislative landscape has had this social commentary that comes with it too. I increasingly across the country get reports of library workers feeling threatened, considering leaving the field, not sure that it's absolutely safe, despite the fact that they got into the work to thought partner and uplift and amplify the goals of those around them, and that they could serve in an institution where public was its middle name. And so I think that we're going to see a lot of the costs of disinvestment in the next 1 to 3 years. Autumn, could we talk about that next slide? So the cost of disinvestment is twofold, and I'm just going to ask us to skip over to the next one, if I may, my friend Autumn. There are two ways to think about this, and I think it's important when we're talking about this with our legislators and with our community. First, there is the cost of disinvestment to the institutions of libraries themselves. Distressed library workers, distressed partnerships, because as we know, libraries are partnership hubs and they support multiple social and academic and educational frameworks, so they will be distressed as well. But then you will see reduced hours. I'm hearing libraries that are considering closing because of House File 718 and are really scrambling to figure out how to make that work when their communities have been disempowered and no longer can enfranchise themselves to solve it locally. You could see staff layoffs, obviously smaller collections, or even longer wait lines for the hold shelf in ebooks because materials have to stretch even further. There could be fewer resources, decreased access, and then smaller programming, which means that as we come together as neighbors to build community, as we host events like we do tonight to explore civic life, these things will be diminished. But when we think about bills being pernicious, I don't think that it's the best framework to think of them as being pernicious to libraries. Again, our stories matter, and who we serve is what matters the most. And so I think that we need to remember that these bills are pernicious to library communities, our city partners, our community groups, our educational sisterhood and brotherhoods. It is the library communities who will have the disproportionately difficult hill to climb when these investments are lost. We will see a ripple effect really disproportionately in rural communities, and the small safety net that we see libraries trying to build in terms of food scarcity, in terms of social services scarcity, those will be incapacitated. And libraries are absolutely known for platforming locally driven initiatives, and so no longer being able to platform community driven programming and events and services will be coupled with the diminishment of connection and community life. And then honestly, when you go dark, when you have less access to information and communication and each other, censorship thrives. So these will be the costs of disinvestment. Can we go to the next slide, please, Autumn? And so this is a moment where we have a choice. As Americans, do we have the opinion that libraries are essential? Our founders, when they created this really interesting form of government, a democratic republic, decided that there needed to be mechanisms in place by which our community could continue to grow, we could continue to be an informed constituency, and services in government would do its best to grow along with the rate of progress that society was taking and pacing. And Iowa specifically has a very unique history in trying to accomplish this with its libraries. In 1938, Des Moines Public Librarian Director Forrest Spalding wrote the Library Bill of Rights. As you can see from the graphic on the right, not only was it adopted by the American Library Association's Council in 1939, but they have had a couple of amendments in between, including this one in Atlantic City in 1948. And this document was a reconciliation of what library services had been and how they could be better and actually aspire to their higher ideals. And so libraries being good stopped being an opinion in many cases at this moment, and it became a value. It became a core professional ethic. It was founded in the First Amendment, and it really works with what libraries do. the right to speak, the right to press, the right to assemble, the right to believe or disbelieve. And I'm going to ask Autumn to go to the next slide because we are going to briefly cover them because it is important. So Article 1 talks about the fact that information and enlightenment of all people in the community, and that materials should not be excluded because of their origin, background, or views of those contributing to their contribution. So the presence of an idea is not its endorsement, but the presence of an idea in a public library will most likely be coupled with the presence of complementary ideas on the shelf beside it, as well as contrary ideas in the marketplace of ideas. Article 2 talks about the fact that libraries should provide materials and information presenting all points of view on current as well as historical issues, and that materials should not be prescribed or removed because of a partisan or doctrinal disapproval. Number 3 is very important to me because I think often when library workers have now been called not only to uplift their communities, but to advocate for the right to do so and hold two jobs, both very emotionally laborious, it is important to point out that it is a core value to the profession and a professional ethic that libraries should challenge censorship in the fulfillment of their responsibilities, provide information and enlightenment. It is a professional duty of a library as an institution to challenge censorship, which is why in Article 4, libraries cooperate with persons and groups concerned with resisting abridgment and expression of free access to ideas. Autumn, would you go to the next slide for me, please? Thank you. Which leads us to Article 5 about a person's right to use the library and how it should not be denied or abridged because of their age or their origin or their background or their views. Free people read freely and all are welcome in America's public libraries. Article 6 really suggests that any exhibit spaces, display spaces, meeting rooms that will be made available to the public should be made available to the public on an equitable basis, regardless of the beliefs or the affiliations and the individuals of groups requesting their use. So there comes that First Amendment right of assembly. And then lastly, Article 7 talks about how all people, regardless of origin, age, background, or views, possess a right to privacy and confidentiality in their library use. This is why we don't keep your passwords. We can help you replace them at the Iowa City Public Library, but we wish to protect your privacy even from us. It is a core value. Libraries should advocate for and educate about and protect people's privacy, safeguarding all library use of data, including personally identifiable information. In this digital age, when we are constantly scrolling to the approve of every single service we use, when we have become the product, we as libraries have a higher calling and a higher responsibility. It increases day after day to teach the public about the importance of confidentiality and privacy and how free inquiry and intellectual freedom can only exist if their privacy is protected. In my lifetime, librarians have been jailed in the United States for protecting a reader's right to privacy. And there have been groups that have helped them. It was around the time of the Patriot Act, around September 11th of 2001. So we're going to go to the next slide and talk about a couple of groups that help with that. Unite Against Book Bans came out of the tsunami of book challenges and censorship and discord that has happened in the United States in the last half decade. It is the largest assortment of personal and institutional allies that unite against book bans. And if you would like to raise your voice for everyone's freedom to read, I invite you to check it out, sign up, and learn about the toolkit. I was sitting on the American Library Association's executive board when we were really starting to get into the highest pitch of this a few years ago. And I remember asking us to keep describing the waters with Banned Books Week and America's Library Association's top 10 most banned books of the year, but could you also start helping us figure out how to build rafts? How do we write letters to the editor? How do we talk to city council members? How do we go to a board meeting for public comment? Because to be honest, there are special interest groups that account for the vast majority of these challenges, and their playbook is available for everybody to see, and we needed to have a counter playbook to support people's freedom to read. Since the late 60s, the Office for Intellectual Freedom out of the American Library Association has been the clearinghouse for folks who have questions about challenges, whether they're a dean, a regent, a provost, a library director, a library worker, a parent who's been helping to develop the reading list to support curriculum in their community, and now they're noticing that their books have been removed. The American Library Association doesn't card you at the door, and if you're interested to just have a conversation about intellectual freedom or any books that have been potentially banned or challenged in your community and understanding what are the next steps, they are a wonderful resource, particularly for our profession. The legal arm of that is not directly connected to the American Library Association, but supports the American Library Association and their lawsuits and amicus briefs to support library workers, authors, publishers, and patrons. And litigation that would support the right to read comes from the Freedom to Read Foundation. And there is actually a merit fund that supports librarians who have been penalized or terminated for supporting a reader's right to read, or supporting a specific display, or supporting intellectual freedom in a way that has resulted in them losing their employment. It's called the Merit Fund. And then lastly, because we had been seeing this pattern of reconciling whether communities can trust themselves to read freely and to make those determinations for themselves, being followed by defunding libraries categorically in a time where our own security and infrastructure would suggest that we need to invest more in information and invest more in our ability to pursue it and analyze it. Show Up for Our Libraries came out of the American Library Association's Public Policy and Awareness Office in order to give you quick tips and tricks and action alerts on specific and geographically pinpointed legislation that will affect your library community. Can we go to the next slide, please? So, why is this important? Because civic engagement thrives in libraries. Libraries serve as the cornerstone of democracy. I think tonight is the very evidence of that as we all work together. And through our federal dollars, we have grant programs, and I think just two wonderful examples of that have been like North Liberty's own Libraries Transforming Communities grant, which came through IMLS, through the American Library Association. And then one of the stories that ALA is amplifying this very week is a library in Iowa that received a $200,000 grant. Iowans' lives are improved every single day when we fight for federal dollars. One of my favorite stories is Nevada, Iowa's library is both its library and its storm shelter, and they do not have an elevator, so a grant through the American Library Association equipped it with an electric chair to go downstairs when there are storms. And so when we think about the civic engagement that can take shape in America's libraries, the only limits are our imaginations. Next slide. Thank you, Autumn. More specifically, it's what you all do with these institutions that make them vibrant. I just did a quick snapshot of our calendar, and I noticed that there are multiple civically engaged groups using our library in just the next week and a half, including League of Women Voters of Johnson County, the Corridor Community Action Network, ACLU of Iowa, and Unify USA. And these are publicly available programs to engage and inform our community in enfranchising themselves and navigating civic life with better ease. One of my favorite things that a library does, though, is that it provides information in order to do that good work. You meet in our meeting rooms, but then you use the services and the collection that belong to you that we meticulously add curation and context and stewardship to. One of our perennial support systems is to provide space for early voting as well as information. And my colleague Jason just published a blog post on that on icpl.org this week. And it really breaks down for folks who are engaging in the process how to do it in simple steps. Can we have the next slide? And then at a national level, the League of Women Voters has been working with the American Library Association for quite a few years to help us develop a framework called Reader, Voter, Ready. And there was a wonderful guide written about 2 years ago that was on civic collaboration, how to start small, how to use your library space to promote your own initiatives as a community group, and how to work with library staff to support and amplify the robust array of services and resources that would support your initiative. And then if we go to the next slide, you'll see that they've additionally created an election collaboration toolkit about how to become a polling space, how to promote information on voting, how to ensure that libraries can operate like the ones in Johnson County do across the nation and enfranchise voters and enfranchise folks who may feel disassociated from the process by coming in, meeting with information, meeting with neighbors, even meeting with candidates to learn more. And so tonight, we come together to, I really celebrate the League of Women Voters. The election collaboration toolkit came out literally like a week and a half ago, and I couldn't wait to enthusiastically email Kathleen about it because I understood that the American Library Association was a platform for the grassroots initiatives that are happening in the chapters of League of Women Voters and in community libraries across the nation. Civic life is happening, civic life is thriving in America's libraries. And if you are not hip to that in your own community, we wanted to make sure that tried and trusted best practices were easily accessible to you in these easy toolkits. So the reason we're all here tonight is the next slide. What can we do? Friends, that's the Iowa City Public Library. And when I'm there, I walk the floors, sometimes in the morning because I'm an early bird. And I'll think about the recipes that folks are going to find, the languages, the 3 different languages of story times that we have every single week. The fact that folks are going to find housing and they're going to find staff that literally partner with you and are as engaged about your success, regardless of what the goal is, as they would be for their own success. I think about how this is a space that is nothing but opportunity waiting for our community to breathe life into it. And our community ebbs and flows with the university, and it looks different semester after semester. And it's beautiful. And so what you can do is use it. You can get a library card tonight, and then you can use it next week and the week after that, because the best way to advocate and support your library is to use it, to know for yourself what is happening between the stacks, and to give your perspective, your opinion, your input, feedback, and power into the future of our library. In fact, I really hope that several of you will gather with us in the coming weeks. We're going to be having a conversation about our next chapter, and we'll be having an opportunity to meet with our brand new director and talk about our next chapter. And this is an opportunity for you to build relationships with us, or grow and increase relationships with us, and talk to us about what our library is going to look like in the years to come. But if we go to the next slide, there are a couple of spaces that I want to directly point you to towards the legislative cycle. So, as much as they can in the deluge, my friends, the American Library Association is trying to track the adverse legislation in every single state in the union. And this resource is helpful because it will show you patterns. It was very helpful for us at the Iowa Library Association level to be watching Florida and recognizing that those bills were coming for us a year or 2 later. And so we had a cheaper tuition by learning from the library workers and the library champions and advocates and community members who stepped out and showed up for libraries and used their voices, because then we could take their place, their talking points, and we could tailor them to our needs and our stakes and our people and move the needle further, faster. And then if you would like to get involved in these grassroots initiatives, the American Library Association also has a federal legislation advocacy alert. As president of the American Library Association, one of my initiatives was to take our legislative days on the Hill and switch them from being invite only to inviting chambers of commerce, League of Women Voters, and community library advocates from around the nation to come together in Washington, D.C., and to be onboarded and connected with legislators. And so that will be happening here in about April. And I would love to send you action alerts about what you can do on the Hill, at the Capitol in Des Moines, in your community, at your city council meetings, but also writing letters to the editor, talking to your neighbors, telling your dentist. It's important to know that if you're looking for more tailored information about libraries, but also library and information adjacent legislation, the Iowa Library Association contracts with 2 lobbyists, one on each side of the political spectrum, and they track this information for us and correlate different information and technology and copyright and AI legislation so that we're aware of the environment and the ecosystem of libraries at ialobby.com. And then it's important to share that another new initiative with the American Library Association is to finally have a public supporter program, much like we have with NPR, the only firewall at the federal level between pernicious legislation and pernicious policy and the library communities that libraries are called to serve is the American Library Association. So I'm hoping my folks aren't in the room, but if they are, they're going to find out that they're both getting tote bags for Christmas, because when you donate in your name or somebody else's name, you can get a tote bag that talks about how you were supporting our libraries. And if you'd like to know more information about that and to support the work so that we don't have to continue to keep digging into the library field, which is about 250,000 people strong in the United States, but we're trying to support the intellectual and literacy life of millions upon millions. If you would like to get more involved at that level, you can do it nationally at iloveourlibraries.org, or I would often really point you to the Friends Foundations of any of the Johnson County libraries. And then lastly, the Iowa Library Association has really ramped up its advocacy. I know there are folks in that room right now that I am thinking of and smiling, and my heart is warming. Our board members who have served on the Board of Trustees subdivision, our government affairs members, our own Katie Roche, who's our development director for the Friends Foundation of the Iowa City Public Library, are working really hard to build relationships at the state level as well as the federal level, and to bring the voices of our local leaders and our local patrons into the spaces of power, so that when we say that as Iowans we value our libraries, and as Iowans over 75% of us have a library card, and we have more public libraries per capita than any other state in the nation, and when we wrote the Library Bill of Rights, that is our legacy. Please fund them and resource libraries well. Because, and I will conclude with this thought, and I look forward to talking with you all, our last slide is really where it lands. Every voice counts. And so I can go and I can sing about tarantulas and how they changed my life, and how the power of libraries is that you don't even have to be a supporter of libraries, but then you can be the face of the profession less than 20 years later. But it only matters when they hear your stories about economic and educational and quality of life impact. When you tell your neighbor and your friend and your dentist and your legislator, and you tell them again and again and again. The future of libraries really rests in our hands, and that might feel heavy. But I already know a few of you in the room, and I'm looking forward to meeting every other one of you in the room and serving you both in the capacity of ALA president, but then over the years as your community and access services coordinator, and I know we can do this together. And so I thank you for the gift of your community and your time. I thank you for, in advance, for keeping track of the legislative cycle and speaking up and finding time to go up to Des Moines with us, because there are folks in that room tonight. There were 700 of us strong who saved the codified funding for public libraries in 2022, and libraries around the state are open today because of folks like our board president, Robin. And so I just want to end this with gratitude and open it up to questions, and thank you again for letting me zoom in from my car.
Okay, so we're going to have a question and answer period now, and I've got a mic here, and so, yeah, and I have a mic runner. Thank you.
Nice.
So, Sam? Question?
Yes, hi.
I don't have a question. I'm the mic runner. So.
Well, can we also give a shout out to Autumn, who rocked those slides? That was awesome. Thank you, Autumn.
Okay, Sam, so my question is this. So you gave us a lot to think about here. Yeah, and so one of my real concerns is censorship and the increasing censorship efforts that we've seen across the United States. And as president of ALA, I want to know, you know, you've got a lot of things to think about. Funding is a huge issue. Federal funding right now has been cut. About censorship, how widespread do you think these efforts are? How successful do you think that they've been? You know, has the fight back against censorship been successful, or do you think that people who are trying to pass increasing censorship legislation, book bans, have been on a roll?
This is an excellent question, Kathleen, and I think it sort of will be dependent on what community you live in and the way you feel about it. We are now living in a country where 4 states have a right to read bill, right? And so that means protections for library workers, protections for books to exist on shelves, so the speech of both our writers, but then also the freedom for our readers. And that didn't exist 5 years ago. And we're seeing the needle move on our consumer rights for patrons having a seat at the table. 20 years ago, librarians were not positioned to put the consumer rights of their patrons at the table. And so publishers have literally been charging libraries manifolds, multiples over. And the cost of digital materials. And then they have pretty much made the rules on how many people can circulate at the same time, how many times we can circulate it before we have to purchase it again so that we have a back, order or a back collection of materials. And so we're starting to see increasingly awareness in the public about the price of ebooks and the fact that library collections, their budgets have in many cases tripled and quadrupled in need, but those resources haven't been there because it's not sustainable to be charged this much for digital resources. And so I think the question of is funding an intellectual freedom issue is pretty obvious, because if we can't afford the books, we can't even debate them. And so when I think about the needle that has been moved in that conversation and how I'm having conversations with a broader spectrum of the American public, I definitely think you're right. I think the fact that the last administration had a book czar also speaks to the fact that this is in the public zeitgeist. So yeah, we're kind of in this friction point where if we hold the line when we fight, we win. But two things are true. Liberty does not defend itself, and this fight isn't free. And so I think that means that we have to consider our, again, the cost of disinvestment and looking at the successful stories where we see them. We saved codified funding for the state. There are 2 injunctions and literal case law at the 8th Circuit about Senate File 496. And that really came out of folks like yourself who had the will and the interest and the capacity and care to have these conversations and to speak with legislators and to hold them to account. And so my long-winded answer to you is, yes, we're holding ground in some places, we're gaining ground in others, and the only way out is through. Libraries have always felt that a First Amendment right was the right to grievance your government, which is why we have policies and processes and procedures to have good faith conversations about how programs and displays and collections exist in a public's library. We need to lean back into trusting ourselves. We need to continue to have those good faith conversations, and we need to remind the American public again how well they have done this for 250 years and why it is paramount that they continue to do so for our success in the future. Does that answer your question, though?
Yes, thank you.
Good.
You mentioned that there are issues with funding libraries locally and it's no longer allowed. Could a way to get around that be having patrons, instead of paying a tax, just have you have a late return fee and pay them that way?
Oh, that's a really interesting question. I think that the reason that we codified public library funding in our state is because obviously Iowans have always valued it, and you resource what you value. And when you think about a pay-to-play or a subscription model, not only are you dependent on building infrastructure for information and literacy on really a model of whether folks determine they find value in it in this moment or not, but then you're also adding that complexity and layer of barriers and essentially telling folks that we understand that this might be an impediment to access the information, but ironically, we're going to add that impediment to provide the information. So I honor your question and the creativity of it, but I really think that a subscription model, a pay-to-play model, a model where we think of government institutions not as pillars to lift us up in equitable spaces to provide us all access to opportunity, but instead places where revenue must be generated, might be counter to what the founders, I think, predicted these institutions to be needful for if we were going to continue to progress as a society. And so to honor your point, I think that takes the public out of library and turns it into private. And the movement to eliminate barriers to access, to support public good, and to make sure that free people read freely means that the infrastructures that we've had at the federal, county, state, and local levels worked. And the reason that they're not working now is because of a deliberate choice to dismantle publicly funded institutions. And if our answer is to privatize them all, I would have to ask what public equitable spaces will exist in American life, and what is the point of government?
Okay, I was just asking if that would be a good way to temporarily get around the thing well, the law's in place. You could just do that. And it wouldn't be like, hey, everybody has to pay this oh, you can't, like, I don't know how donations are taxed for going to the library. I didn't know if that could be a solution in the short term while we deal with the long-term effects of the levies being illegal in towns.
Well, I think there are two thoughts of thread that your question makes me think of, and I love questions that make me think. I think the first one is, it's a temporary solution to a permanent problem, and the permanent problem is removing the local right to governance yourself and to resource your local values. The idea of that, whether it's for a park or an airport or whatever a special levy would be, has a lot of constitutional implications outside of libraries. And then while it might seem like donation models or penalty or fees models might support a library, an annual budget and a projection for the next fiscal year has to be developed. And if that's based on data that we really cannot extrapolate because of donations and late fees, particularly when the model of libraries has been to be free and open to the public, it would be fuzzy math at best and probably create more harm than good. I think it's a wonderful place, your creativity and where the energy is going. But as a person who's been in public libraries for the better part of 20 years and has managed both state library, public library department, and then national association budgets, I'm not quite sure that that is a sustainable way forward. And when you find a third and fourth and fifth way and you stretch that dollar in libraries, I have noticed a historical precedent to never get them back. Libraries are often the lowest hanging fruit in a community when it comes to finding places to cut. And so I think this is the moment where we need to really decide whether libraries are an opinion or libraries are an American value. And if they're a value, that means that you resource them and you actually commit resources and energy and effort into them in a way that's robust and sustainable and fiscally and operationally sound. Does that honor your question?
Yes.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is this on? Is it okay? My name is Nancy Porter. Hi, and I'm a lifelong educator as well as a member of the League of Women Voters. And I really appreciated you listing those sites that we can go to, because it seems to me this is something we need to start today and now. We don't want to wait till April. We want to get in there and make our thoughts known. And we don't have a lot of friends, but we have some friends. So we need to talk to our friends and those who aren't our friends, because those who aren't our friends don't really get what's happening in these movements to take money away from government money, which I agree with. There are some things government does very well. Maybe some of them get messed up and they need to be renewed or redone a little, but our public libraries, even Carnegie buildings, just, it's a heart-wrenching thing.
Oh my goodness, your thoughts influence my own, and it gives me at least three off the bat. The first is that you're right. Libraries work so well that I think often they are overlooked or under-resourced, because you don't think of a road being smooth until it has a pothole. And libraries work really well, They support finding jobs, they support education, they get you come in, you grab your load of books before you go on summer vacation, if your summer vacation isn't exclusively at the Iowa City Public or your local public library. And so I think you make that good point. The second good point that I would love to just amplify that you made was that we have to be talking to people who may not agree with us. We have to get out of our echo chambers. I'm embarrassed. I'm not happy to start with the tarantula story, but there are Sam Helmicks out there who can do a 180. They just have not been clued in on the fact that libraries are for them, and that regardless of where you're at in your life, in your learning journey, there is something that a public library offers you. And then lastly, I think you're right about planting that tree. The first best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago. The second best time is today. And so preparing ourselves, understanding what the legislative schedule is going to look like, and committing time and energy to it ahead of time increases our odds of not only accomplishing it, but succeeding. Because what I'm noticing at the national level is that when we show up for libraries, we win.
So which one of those sites should we start with?
I think that what I would start with is the action alerts, because that's going to tell you what the Iowa Library Association is doing. It's going to kind of keep a track on what's happening in your state, but also in your neighbor's state, because some of you may, bounce a little bit from here to here. We have a wonderfully transit population because of the university. I think that's a good place to start. And then you can sign up and decide whether you have 5 minutes, 5 hours, or 5 days. Here are steps that the American Library Association will give you to show up for libraries.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you very much for your talk. I thought this was great. So my question is about motivating people in communities without already active libraries to care about this issue. Because I look at Iowa City Public Library, I'm newer to the area, and I've been blown away by the programming, like the space, all this sort of stuff. And but I remember the community library that I had growing up. I would relate to your story. I don't think I attended a single event there. I used a study room probably 4 times in high school. And so I would never have cared, and I don't think my parents would care about their community library because it's not good already. And so it's hard to say, I live in this small town, but I know that in Iowa City, it's great that they have a wonderfully funded library, and so I'll call my representative. Do you think there's anything that we can do about that? Is there funding that we could send to a rural community to have their library more active, to make people in those communities actually care? And I'm simplifying. I'm sure plenty of them do care, but that's my question.
Oh, no, I think this is a great question, because I think, again, it does sort of depend on the community and who are the stakeholders and who's robustly active. We still have a friend's shop, in the lobby of the Burlington Public Library. It has been open and friends staffed, like volunteer staffed, every single operation hour of that library. And so that teaches us a couple things. There was a robust grassroots movement to support that new library, right? Despite the Sam Helmicks in town. And there has been a continued robust support of that library. And so I think it happens a couple of ways. You find yourself in the library and you fall in love with it, and you recognize that it not only serves your needs, but it serves others. So the first step is always going to have to be, the Sam Helmick I am now, regardless of what town I'm in, I try to visit its library when I'm passing through, or what town I live in, I'm going to be a user of that library, because I give my colleagues and the excellent staff a lot of credit for the strength of the Iowa City Public Library, but I also want to give a lot of credit to the community groups who have everything from events like tonight to the socially awkward board gaming group that meets regularly at the Iowa City Public Library, because they're choosing with their community library to make it the vibrant space that they want it to be. They tell our children's services coordinator about ideas for programs and connect them with partners, and they do the same thing with the adult services program and the outreach services staff. And I think that is actually part of the vibrancy of a library. And once you recognize that you contribute personally to that vibrancy through use and feedback and creativity, that generates that value proposition for folks like me who have it completely off the radar. And I know that that's a lot, but I do feel like our public institutions are as good as our investment in them, whether that's a public school or a library. And to that end, I would say that there are a lot of wonderful rural libraries that are doing this very well. In fact, the Friends group at the Cherokee Library in Northwest Iowa, which is in the seat of a lot of actual legislative power right now, where a lot of folks who have had some things to say about libraries, both I think in support, but maybe even a little bit disinterested, are listening and paying attention. So I think it's just finding a few people. I don't want to oversell my position, but I don't think in 2023 I slept much, because all I really had was a handful of wonderful library advocates inside and outside of my community, a hashtag called Keep Libraries Local, and a Facebook account. And that was enough to stop the dismantling of library codified funding in the state, and to have some backroom conversations. So I think we need to not underestimate the power of one voice and the power of one story, because if I can do it, anybody can. Does that honor your question, though?
Oh, yes. Thank you.
Hi. Is it on? Yeah. Thank you for an inspired presentation tonight. But I kind of want to look ahead, knowing what the legislature has tried to do in the last 2 or 3 years. Do you have any insight into what might be coming down the pike next year?
I think we're going to see more of the same. I think we're going to have to be very careful with the wordsmithing, like shall versus may with codified library funding. I think that as communities try to find additional avenues to locally support and resource their values, we may see like a stripping of like franchise fees and local sales tax options. I think that there's been an overreach from the state to come into local communities to try to pretty much supersede how they've chosen to govern themselves, even though I would say Iowa local communities do a pretty remarkable job. I also think that we'll continue to see a conversation about the presence of ideas being in their endorsement. And I'm not sure I think that that's necessarily true. I think that makes us afraid of ideas. I also think that there will be more conversation around whether we are a state that teaches our children what to think versus how to think. I think that this is not going to be left exclusively to the K through 12 space like it pretty much was the last 5 years. I think that we're starting to see with last year's legislative cycle, and then honestly, the tragic events in the nation throughout the last couple of weeks, that this will start to enter more of the academic, collegiate, and corporate spaces. So I think I would be keeping an eye on those at the same time that there are so many other important things on the table. And it really does mean kind of having ialobby.org or the ALA tracker on your bookmarked favorites so that you're keeping track, because honestly, when there's a super majority in the legislature, some of the rules of 24-hour cycle and fair warning and is not really fully always at play. In fact, I really appreciate the institutions around me in this community for supporting the opportunity for advocates to go, or people that are in the profession to go and speak knowledgeably with very minimal notice. And to flex hours and to take vacation and to advocate. And that's why I'm calling on others who may have time and aren't teaching our children in the middle of the school day, but are, in favor of what the work of teacher librarians are doing, to come and be in those spaces with us, because your voices matter, and you may have a different type of capacity to support folks who are doing the good work in those institutions. I hope that honored your question.
This is not a really deep question. It's actually a feel-good thing. Thank you so much. This has been very interesting. I'm a lifelong library user. All my grandparents and parents and everybody was. I'm also a real involved league member. I had this neat experience. 3 weeks ago, I'm looking up for books up in nonfiction like I do. I had a long list, and all of a sudden, a book. Lolly Agers, the former director, that got me. That when I first joined the league, she was on the board with me. Carol Spaziani was on the board with me. Anyway, this book was there. I took it home, and it was so inspiring. So there's been this long connection between the League of Women Voters, especially here in Johnson County and Iowa City, and the library. I loved it. Of course, I knew Lolly. She's passed on, and so is Carol. But anyway, I just wanted to share that, because just one of those things that happens when you use the library and you're looking the shelf, and there it was. And I can't tell you how wonderful that book was, to read what happened to make this library what it is. I just was terribly inspired. Love the library, and I'm just also thinking about the legislators, and I wonder if this might have a little impact on them. My husband and I are not really good at technology. We know how to read, but anyway, of course, books are great, but the librarians are so helpful here. Any technology question, they never make you feel dumb, and they actually help so graciously. So I'm thinking maybe that would have impact to tell our legislators, and our local ones are all for us, I know that, but other ones that maybe also have trouble with technology if they're over 60. Anyway, those are just thoughts, but I wanted to share about that book of Lolly's, and I would recommend anybody that's interested in the history of this library to read it. It's just wonderful.
Thank you. Could you give me your first name again? I missed it.
Oh, I didn't say my name. I'm sorry. My name is Galen Woolbitter. You can look at my I read. I got a lot of books, but I know you can't look at my record. But no, I would happy if you would be. What was that?
Thank you for being a prolific library user. We would give you frequent flyer miles if we could, and thank you for invoking some of the heroic names that being ALA president is one thing. Being a member of the staff of the Iowa City Public Library is vastly another, because I will invoke some powerful historical names that have changed librarianship in Iowa City and in Johnson County, but also in the nation. And I do think of folks like Carol and Lolly. I'm personally reading A Century of Stories right now because PBS will be recording an episode for their Road Trip Nation on the Iowa City Public Library this coming Monday, and I want to talk about that century of stories and where we came from and where we're going. Susan, Carol Logston, Maeve Clark, Jason, Anne, Angie, we have a powerhouse of wonderful people that I get to work and learn from every single day, and you're absolutely right. They don't make me feel small when I have questions. They don't do that with anybody in the community. You saw how Bond was keeping me cool, even though I was nervous. And that's how they are with everybody. So thank you for using the services. Thank you for that excellent point about the fact that we're one of the oldest, not to paint with a broad brush, because you see my tech limitations too, but we are one of the oldest states in the union. And when we think about the digital divide and trying to mitigate that so that medical, civic, tax, federal, everything, like all these these elements of civic life that are increasingly and almost exclusively on digital platforms, libraries are really the only space where we're really narrowing that digital divide in a free and equitable space, but we're not getting additional resources really to train the staff, to build the infrastructure, to have the time. And so what we have now deeply needs to be valued, and the congressionally mandated funds that were supposed to go to the institution of the Museum and Library Services, the state matching dollars, the ability to locally resource your values in your libraries all matter because of stories like yours and stories like Lolly's.
This lady's asking me the name of the book, and I cannot quote it. Darn it! Oh, I know. I just remembered. A century. It's a century of what?
Stories.
Of stories. That's actually right. Yeah, A Century of Stories. Lolly Eggers. Oh, I'm not sure. I'm not sure if the library has more than one copy. I returned my copy. Yeah.
Y'all have to just keep coming back until you can check it out. I think that's the only solution. Are there any other questions while we have each other? This has been a delight from my heart. I really appreciate you all giving me a chance to talk with you and learn with you.
I just have one simple question. You had commented on something being on Monday night regarding the libraries.
Oh, so on Monday, PBS is doing their Road Trip Nation, and they have three student librarians. Their students going into the library field, and they're driving around the nation and visiting libraries, and the Iowa City Public is going to be the first one recorded, so wish us luck, will you? Because we are recognized as a wonderful institution that is a reflection of the community that it serves, and I have the honor of talking about it a little bit because of the position I hold for the next couple of months, and I really think that is going to be fun and important, and hopefully we can have a watch party next fall. The two important things that I would remind you about is that I think in a couple weeks' time, and I know my staff, my colleagues are in the room, we will be having a community conversation about the next chapter of the Iowa City Public Library and its facilities and space, and we would love to see you there. And then we also have our wonderful director and a reception for them so that you can build relationship and community with our next leader for the next chapter of the Iowa City Public Library. And so those events are on the calendar. And if I weren't on my phone, I would pull up the dates and the time, but I know I have some lovely colleagues in the room that will make sure you all feel welcome and invited into that space. And I really hope to see you there. I will be there in person for both. And I think that they're going to be instrumental to the beautiful and bright future of our library.
Fabulous.
And we need you there for it.
The session that she's speaking about, future use of the library, is this Monday, in a few days, at 5:30, I believe, in this room.
Oh, it's not, so it's the recording of the TV show, not the
The TV show is separate from the community meeting about how we can take the library to the next stage of the future.
I'm sorry.
The two different events.
So that it's recorded.
So Sam has mentioned two different things. The PBS show is one piece, that one that she's doing on Monday, but the meeting she mentioned about the community's input on the next stage of the Iowa City Public Library is this coming Monday in the evening. So please consider attending. It's at 5:30.
Yeah. I'm going to drop it in the chat. There's a link to it. Thank you, Robin. That's at 5:30, my friends. And Joe Huberty, who was the designer of the institution you are sitting in right now, will be joining us for that conversation. And I really hope that you all will join us. Robin, as always, thank you for having me and supporting me where I always need it.
Thanks, Sam. Okay, thank you, Sam. This worked out really well, and thanks to everyone for the questions. I need to say recordings of this evening's lecture will be posted on the League of Women Voters of Johnson County website and also on the Iowa City Public Library's Library Channel website for those unable to attend this evening or if you want to watch it again. I want to say again that our co-sponsors, the Antelope Lending Library and Johnson County Libraries, have tables set up in the back of the room with information about them. Please take a look. Anyone interested in becoming a member of the League of Women Voters of Johnson County, we have some pamphlets on this small table over by the door here. And thank you all for coming. Thank you. And thanks, Sam.
Thank you all. Hope you have a lovely day. I'll see you at the library.